Coming up in the 5th Vendée Mag. The calm before the first major Indian Ocean storm. 1992 Vendée Globe winner Alain Gautier talks about the Southern Ocean. And Inside takes us through the history of women skippers in the Vendée Globe. Leading the 10th Vendée Globe after 17 days, the Fab Four hurtled down the South Atlantic in a valiant attempt to hang on to a low-pressure system that had built up off Brazil and was pushing them in a direct line towards the Cape of Good Hope. The quartet pulled away from the other 35 sailors and shot into a different dimension, a long, drawn-out fight for overall victory. Such a level of commitment and intensity from leader Charlie Dallin and chasers Thomas Rouillon and Johan Richon was only to be expected. In terms of physical performance and morale, they've been on the ball from the start. Shaping up for a long combat, the leaders prepared to enter the tunnel around the Antarctic.
It's great that I can keep this low pressure for a while yet. I'm being shaken about quite a bit, but this morning the sea state is a little better. The sea is changing quite a lot actually, depending on just where you are.
The surprise package was Sébastien Simon. Although he had shown his credentials in recent transatlantic races, his consistency among the pace setters was impressive. He quickly optimised his settings to single-handedly master a boat that won the ocean race with a crew last year.
I'm second in the Vendée Globe aboard Groupe Dubray.
The four skippers zipped along the ridge of low pressure, flirting with the windless areas on each side like a tightrope walker trying to avoid slipping into the abyss. At the centre of the narrow corridor, a perfect wind blew at an ideal angle to sail quickly and surf on a relatively calm sea. The sailors' steely nerves showed signs of fraying as the speed, ambient noise and repeated impacts made living conditions difficult. Fatigue increased, and some began to doubt their ability to keep up such a frenetic pace on a round-the-world race.
It's really hard right now as I'm looking for a slot to get away on a low front. It's like a sprint, really. The boat's jumping all over the place. She's going very fast, and it's extremely unpleasant. It's quite worrying, too, for the equipment. I don't really like how this group bombs away any old how. I mean, I'm one of them, but I can't spend 2 months like this. Look who's there.
Attempts to bluff one's direct rivals could be a sign that the mind games between the contenders for victory had already begun.
Just passing Seb. Hi, Johan. Oh, it's funny that Johan should say that, really, as he's the most likely to go charging in. We've known that about him since the Figaro. I suspect the top three have had some mechanical issues, as I genuinely found them slow. I know what they're capable of, so I wouldn't be surprised to learn that they'd had problems. I shouldn't have caught up with them like that.
The group behind had no option but to try and follow the same tack. Jeremy Bayou, Nicholas Lundven, Sam Goodchild, Yannick Bestaven and Paul Meyer were now over 100 miles in arrears, either having been swept away by the leader's power and pace or having eased off for physical or technical reasons, or simply as a precaution.
The little area of low pressure that propelled us across the South Atlantic was quite sporty. It's moving south of us now. We're trying to stay on the heels of the group of four ahead. It would be good if we could progress with that group.
Boris Herrmann was the only one of the pre-race favourites to sail mid-fleet. He'd been in this situation since the North Atlantic and was struggling to bridge the gap.
Such a beautiful preparation, a new boat, prepared for 4 years. The others go at 20 knots and here we are. It makes me a bit sad. I wish I could cry sometimes. Well, I was just a few days ago with Benjamin Dutroux and he's a few hundred miles further back. So, does it really matter? It's just a game.
The German was monitored by an all-female patrol comprising 3 skippers, Sam Davis, Justine Metro and Clarisse Crémer. But the gap had widened, and they were no longer in the same weather system as the leaders, over 1,000 nautical miles ahead. The older generation foilers were sometimes isolated in the rush to the far south. They attempted to catch up, but after falling off the back of the low-pressure area, were left with a sea that had been whipped up by the storm and then faced unpredictable winds and unstable sea states. Painfully realising that the race was getting away from them, they were left to find other sources of motivation. Their mood swung back and forth. They raged and despaired at having given so much to little end.
Psychologically, this bit is pretty painful. Kind of watching the boats ahead sail away and the boats behind catch up.
It's been like that for a week now. It's faster for the leaders. It's like life. The rich get richer, or the poor get poorer. Sure, we're always trotting out this line, they've got a better boat, nah. But even so, we're in a race, and it's frustrating to see the leaders and the little boats just ahead of us sail away, and for us to feel powerless. I need to find a new me. I need to set records for my boat and new challenges for myself.
I think I found the wind again, and this time I'm off. Off to the 40s.
The wind's back.
In the final group, the daggerboard boats were enjoying a great tussle with the foilers, left behind in the race to the doldrums. Skippered by Arnaud Boissier, Alain Roura and Giancarlo Pedotte. Jean Le Cam, Louis Duc, Benjamin Ferret and Violette d'Orange crossed paths at regular intervals as they looked to avoid the lulls and crossed fingers in the hope of a new low to whisk them along.
Today I've Louis Duc in view. I haven't seen a boat since Madeira. I'll try and call him to see how he's getting on. Hey Louis, I can see you. I can see you, Louis. How are you? Great. Same for me. It's nice here. Conditions are wonderful. That's right. Well, the wind could be a little more stable. I don't know what to wear at times. An unbelievable view this morning. Let me show you. Look who's outside. Here's Benjamin's boat. Real close. Close encounters.
Voilà, on fait des rencontres.
As the hours ticked by, the temperature dropped and the sailors got their winter gear back out. They made the most of the slightest lull to take care of their boats and to check, mend and replace equipment before entering the Indian Ocean. At 15:45 UTC on Friday the 29th of November, Charlie Dallin was the first skipper to reach the longitude of the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, and like 4 years earlier, led the way into the Southern Ocean.
That's it. I passed the Cape of Good Hope. The next step is to enter the Indian Ocean. I'm glad to have finished the South Atlantic section. Let the battle continue. And it's a close battle too.
Thomas Rouillon, Sébastien Simon and Johan Richon followed within 3 hours. The Cape of Good Hope is the first major landmark and gave us an opportunity to measure the enormous gaps that opened up within the fleet over the first third of a mind-blowing race in terms of density and performance. After stampeding across the South Atlantic, the top four were separated by just 3 hours after 19 days at sea. Jeremy Bayou and Nicholas Lundven passed the waypoint slightly over 8.5 hours behind. Paul Mayat 1 day later. 10th place Samantha Davis was already 2 days back, while Justine Metro and Boris Herman almost 3 days. As for the others far behind, the gap seemed immeasurable, frightening even.
I'm 1,000 miles from Good Hope, so I'll soon be there. Well, soon. Just a week behind the leading group. Nothing at all.
The Indian Ocean was welcoming to the race leaders. The temperature plunged, but the sea was moderate, like it has been pretty much since the fleet set sail, and the boats entered without being unduly shaken up. Charlie Dalin and Johan Rischom swapped the lead from one tack to the next.
Look who's here. Well, if it isn't that rascal, Johan Rischom. Charlie Dalin, just there. It's always a good sign to be with him. He generally goes the right way.
Généralement, il va dans la bonne direction.
Thomas Rouillon had dropped back slightly.
I stopped for 3 or 4 hours behind a big line of squalls. The three up front have got away a little. That's just the way it is. This is what I'm worried about this morning.
The first large Southern Ocean low was forecast for midweek. As it was forming behind them, the skippers began to watch its development and anticipate its path so that they could plot their own route towards the Kerguelen Islands. Meanwhile, back in the South Atlantic, Manu Cousin collided with a floating object or possibly a sea mammal.
This morning, I inspected the whole boat after my collision last night. The bow hit something for sure. Sent me flying. I have bruises on both sides, but nothing's broken, so I guess I'm okay. I'll go easy for a little while, listen to the boat, and see if anything seems odd. If not, I'll continue on my way.
The alarm bells went off for Eric Bellion too. The rudder systems gave way, causing the boat to lurch. The skipper had a long job on his hands to fix it.
Paired my rudder down lines. The rudders were lifting. What a mess. I hope it'll work. Time will tell. I've worked all day on it. I'll just try and get going again. You can't imagine how tired I am. It's hell.
Pip Hare was also demoralised by the mounting problems.
While I was sleeping, the furling line for my big sail broke, just snapped. I'm tired and I just feel like I'm being punished, really punished. What a mess.
In these remote waters with little freight traffic, the skippers launched the Argo floats given to them by Ifremer scientists. These floats collect data to improve our knowledge of these wild ocean environments. The second part of the fleet, led by Jean Le Cam, was being driven by a consistent breeze. Their pace had picked up and the whole group was preparing for much rougher conditions on entering the Indian Ocean. A large area of low pressure was set to scoop them up as they rounded the Cape of Good Hope with its violent countercurrents.
I'm just ahead of the front. It's stiffening a bit. I've got exactly the right sails up.
And then we've just been doing these crazy surfs.
And in the middle of the pack, the group with Sam Davis and Boris Herman was chomping at the bit, but the conditions ahead could work in their favour. While the front runners have consistently stretched their lead since the start of the race, this group should be spared the gales forecast over the coming days and might well make up ground in the medium term. Ahead of them, Paul Meyer, hanging on to the coattails of the leading group since the North Atlantic, was the first to benefit from the high wind, making giant strides to catch up with Yannick Bestaven. The leaders' strategies varied based on their position, speed and the local wind conditions they faced and expected to have when the first southern storm passes. The chasing pack, including firstly Jeremy Bayou and Nicolas Lundven, then Thomas Rouillon a little later, and even Johan Rischom, veering left at the last minute, have all chosen a northern course to avoid the strongest winds and the very heavy seas, which will be whipped up by the storm with troughs of over 8 metres. A sensible decision by seasoned skippers aiming to optimise downwind conditions after the low, even though it could result in sailing a greater distance and losing time.
I'm heading north. I'm trying so hard to get out of the way that I've gone slightly west. I'm almost doing a U-turn to position myself slightly out of the way of this low, which will then take us a long way, almost as far as Australia and New Zealand. We'll then begin that big sprint east.
The leading duo, after an initial hesitation and briefly turning north, have chosen to play on the wind from the developing low-pressure system by maintaining an easterly course to stay ahead of it. The goal is to maintain optimal speed on this course for as long as possible, regardless of the sea state. It's a high-risk tactic, but the potential rewards are huge.
In weather like this, it's hard to imagine the rough conditions ahead, isn't it? We'll aim for the centre of the low, which seems large and somewhat calmer.
Having enjoyed calm conditions up until now, aside from a brief gale at Cape Finisterre, the racers are now getting down to brass tacks, facing the high seas, winds and colours that inspired their dream adventure. The phase ahead will be the most challenging of their Vendée Globe. The skippers will have roughly 1 month to cross the Indian Ocean and Pacific Oceans before emerging at Cape Horn. The legend of the 10th Vendée Globe and its heartfelt accounts are currently unfolding, and we're here today to talk about them. Meet Alain Gautier. Hi, Alain. Hi. You've been the race's safety expert for some time. You're now Isabelle Josch's team manager. Why do sailors and people ashore have such a keen interest in the Southern Ocean?
People think of the South as being far from any inhabited land. Plus, there's the proximity of Antarctica, which we're clearly looking to circumnavigate. So you add all that to the legend of Cape Horn, which has a lot to do with it. And you have the Southern Ocean, with these incredibly rough, high seas, where the northwest and southwest seas intersect, and so on.
You brought back footage from your round the world. We saw pictures of ice, since the course was much further south back then.
Well, let's say there was no ice boundary. We were free to circumnavigate Antarctica as closely as we wanted, really. But you couldn't go too far south without the risk of running into numerous icebergs. So we often faced the odd iceberg. When that happened, we'd head north. But it was definitely a risky business.
Some believe the skippers will adjust their pace here. What does that mean?
There are a few factors. The pace of the race is one of them for a start. But are the boats performing at their best in the south? I don't think so. The sea state just doesn't allow it. We saw this between Brazil and South Africa in the South Atlantic. We saw all the records being broken. The weather, of course, played a big part. But the absence of rough seas also helped. So this drove the boats hard. In the south, you get a cross-sea and a considerably confused sea state. This naturally slows the boats down a lot.
How does the mental challenge of solitude and the distance from any land in the south affect the skipper's commitment?
It'll very much depend on each skipper's mental state and their frame of mind. You've got to be willing to push yourself and accept the solitude. I think the back runners will feel it more. The leaders are aware they have 35 or so boats trailing them. We've seen in previous editions that in the event of a problem, the survival of a skipper can depend on having other contenders nearby. So, when you're lost, that's a psychological challenge. The front runners need to be ready to push the boats to their limits, going fast, but without overdoing it or taking unnecessary risks. The solitude maybe isn't as bad as it used to be. We now have the satellite phone and WhatsApp and all the rest of it. Back then, we only spoke with the teams ashore maybe once, twice a week. No messages, nothing. We really were on our own.
How has equipment changed since then, particularly for combating the cold?
Oh, so many things have changed. Perhaps the biggest change was autopilots. The trust skippers place in their autopilots. And we know that it's crucial, of course, when sailing single-handed. Without those autopilots, the skipper is forced to retire. In 1989-92, I held the helm for 15, 16 hours a day in the Southern Ocean. Fortunately, I had a helm inside the boat. I wouldn't have been able to steer for 15 15 hours from outside the whole time. I forced myself to do these 15, 16 hours a day, weather permitting, to spare my autopilots. But autopilots have really come on it in leaps and bounds. Otherwise, all-weather gear and life aboard. I had an aluminium boat on my first Vendée Globe, so there was very little insulation on board. The condensation was uncomfortable at 2 degrees Celsius, so a lot of things have changed for the better. Except maybe for the actual comfort on board. The old boats were slower, not so rigid and less stark, so we had an easier ride. That's a game changer compared to now.
Thank you, Alain. This week we visited the Maritime Museum in Paris for an excellent exhibition on the Vendée Globe, tracing its history since 1989. It was a chance to reflect on the role of women in this legendary race.
We're live from the Musée de la Marine with journalists and have a few questions for you.
I'd like to know why so few women take part in this race, even now.
There are a lot of us, compared to a while ago. The number of women in the Vendée Globe is relatively high compared to ocean racing overall. Women represent 10 to 15% of ocean races overall, but it takes time to have examples and to normalise high-performance projects. There's also the question of long careers. The leaders are generally between 35 and 45 years old, so at this stage of your life, you can't take time out if you aim to be among the best. The number of sailors who set sail on the 10th of November is already a Vendée Globe record. We also have 6 women taking part. It is the first time we've seen so many in the race, including skippers who've already done it. Then there's the amazing Violette d'Orange, who, at 23, is the youngest competitor in the race's history. She also communicates really well, so we can share her experience day by day.
What sparked your passion for this when you were a teenager or a youngster?
I'll always remember being the only girl in the group when I started optimist sailing. My instructors were very supportive, and when the boys got frustrated that I was ahead, it only motivated me more. Later, for ocean racing, I think that seeing sailors like Ellen MacArthur, Sam Davis and Clarisse Crémer sailing the Vendée Globe, the Mini Transat and the Figaro made me think, why not me? Isabelle Autissier and Catherine Chabaud were the first 2 women to race in the Vendée Globe. Isabelle had to make repairs, so she retired, and Catherine Chabaud completed her circumnavigation and became the first woman to finish a Vendée Globe and to finish a non-stop, unassisted, round the world via the 3 Capes. Along with Florence Artaud, these women set sail to wrestle with the elements, and they're truly remarkable figures. I believe they've inspired many generations of young girls. In the playground, my friends and I would pretend to be them. We would imitate Florence Artaud, Catherine Chabaud and Isabelle Autissier. They were our role models. 15 women have started the race. This year, there are 6. Only 10 have finished, with the best ranking from Ellen MacArthur, who finished 2nd in 2001. That's the gear worn by Catherine Chabaud and Isabelle Autissier. We also have Catherine Chabaud's books and the drawings sent in by the schools that followed her, with little words of encouragement. We wanted them to be represented in the objects shown to the public, as well as in the scenography, through the images and photographs we display. This exhibition has to strike a balance to be fully representative. The British skipper, Ellen MacArthur, one of the youngest skippers to take part in the Vendée Globe, bid farewell to her parents at an emotional start. She battled fiercely against seasoned sailors throughout the race, particularly Michel Desjoyaux, both neck and neck at the finish. Ultimately, Desjoyeaux won, but MacArthur came in as a strong second. At the finish, we see a poignant moment when she kisses her boat, saying that the hardest part of the race is leaving her boat behind after such an incredible journey. I'd like to quote Sam Davis, who said that mental strength counts as much as physical strength, and I think that women can show extreme mental strength. I say this as a woman perhaps, but throughout a woman's life, she needs perhaps to show greater mental strength than a man. That's one supposition at least.